That night started normal. A couple callers mad about the price of groceries. A guy trying to sell concert tickets. The usual jokes from people who want to hear their own voice on air. Then the texts came in, one after another, with the same message written 10 different ways. Go outside, look up. At first I ignored it because people text nonsense during thunderstorms and meteor showers. Then my producer Caleb came out of the little office with his phone in his hand and his mouth half open. Caleb is not a dramatic guy. He is a quiet guy who fixes problems without talking about them. He said, "Evan, I think you need to see this." We stepped out the back door into the alley, right next to the generator cage. The air felt wrong. Not mystical, not spiritual, wrong in a physical way. The hair on my arms lifted. The air had that dry, sharp smell you get near a big electrical substation. I looked up over the rooftops, and the sky had bands in it. Wide, faint stripes, greenish and red, moving slow. Not clouds, not city light reflections. It looked like aurora, the northern lights, except this was St. Louis. Caleb said, "That is not supposed to be here." I went back inside and pulled up the space weather feeds. The official ones, not the conspiracy pages. The warnings were there, written in careful government language. Strong solar storm, geomagnetic disturbance, possible disruptions to power, satellites, radio, navigation. The numbers were high. The planetary K index was pinned at the top. They were using words that people only use when they are trying not to panic. I went live again and told the audience what I could verify. I kept my voice steady. I said, if the power flickers, do not jam the roads. I said, charge what you can charge. I said, check on your neighbors. I did not say anything about prophecy. I did not say anything about revelation. I did not say anything about end times. Then the phones lit up with a different kind of caller. Not the bored ones. Not the angry ones. The trembling ones. People who sounded sober, scared, and sure they had found the missing piece of the whole world. I did not put most of them on air. I kept thinking, if I feed this, it grows. Panic is a fire. Oxygen is attention. I kept the show moving, did a longer segment on practical stuff, told people where the warming centers were if the grid went down, reminded them to keep extra water because pumping stations run on electricity. That was the first time I noticed the word grid made people inhale hard. The grid was not a concept anymore. It was a life support machine. At 9:45 in the evening, the first big outage hit. I know the time because the studio clock jumped and flashed, then corrected, then jumped again. The lights went out for maybe 4 seconds, then came back dim. The computers stayed on because the battery backups caught it. The transmitter, our whole reason for existing, coughed and came back. I could hear the fans in the rack room change pitch as voltage wobbled. Caleb started the generator. The whole building shook. The air filled with diesel smell through the vents. The studio lights stabilized into that ugly yellow that screams emergency. I kept talking. I kept my mouth close to the mic because the generator noise bled into everything. I said, I am still here. If you can hear me, you still have a receiver that still works. That matters tonight. I got my first call from Leah Park at 11:10. I did not know her before this. I only knew her voice once she hit the line and I heard the background chaos behind her. She was in Dallas, Texas. She worked in an emergency room. She told me her full name, her job, and where she was standing, because she wanted somebody to remember it correctly. Leah said, Evan, I am calling from Baylor University Medical Center. I am in a hallway because the triage area is packed, and security is trying to keep the doors from turning into a stampede. I have been a nurse for 11 years. I have done trauma. I have done pandemic shifts. I have done the nights where the air smells like bleach, and the whole place hums from stress. This is different. We are getting people in who are not burned, not bleeding, not sick in the normal sense. They are disoriented and terrified. A bunch of them are insisting that something is standing in their bedroom, or that they heard trumpets, or that they saw writing in the air. I'm not saying I believe that part. I'm saying people are acting infected with certainty. We have people who are physically fine trying to rip out intravenous lines and sprint into the street because they think their family is being taken. We have people who drove here from 2 hours away because they think hospitals are holy ground. We have a couple of cardiac arrests from the panic alone. We have one older man who came in holding a Bible, and he is calm, Evan. He is calmer than anybody, and he keeps telling strangers that the first seal is open. He is not yelling. He is not begging. He is giving instructions. He told a mother to stop trying to call her husband and start filling the bathtub with water. He told a teenager to take off his headphones and watch the exits. I hate that it sounded smart. I asked her what the hospital was seeing medically. Fever, rash, anything. She said no consistent pattern, no clear toxin, no gas leak signatures, no chemical odor, no mass carbon monoxide exposure. She said the strangest part was the timing. People were showing up right after the sky turned, right after the power started dancing. I thanked her and told her to call back if she could. When she hung up, I stared at the soundboard for a second, trying to decide if I should say the word everyone was thinking. I did not. I said, panic can be contagious. Fear is a physical thing. The next morning, half the city felt hungover. The aurora faded by dawn. The official reports blamed the storm. The power company blamed damaged protective relays and overloaded transformers. The Federal Aviation Administration issued ground stops the previous night because navigation signals were unstable. Some flights diverted. Some planes sat on taxiways for hours. The news anchors smiled too hard while saying it was under control. At 1:15 in the afternoon, I got another call from Leah. Her voice was lower now. Less adrenaline. More dread. Leah said, Evan, I stayed after shift. I slept in my car for 2 hours. I am back inside because staffing is falling apart. People are not showing up. Some quit. Some are stuck in traffic because half the stoplights are out and drivers are getting violent at intersections. We had a line fight over a portable charger in the waiting room. I had to help security pull 2 men apart. Nobody is acting normal. Here is the part you need to hear. We had a cluster of patients with the same thing. Sudden bleeding gums, nosebleeds that do not stop, bruises appearing under the skin with no trauma. We drew labs. Platelets are low. Clotting is off. It looks hemorrhagic. It looks viral. We isolated them. Then the lab machines started throwing errors. We had to run manual backups. The power keeps dipping. The pharmacy refrigerator alarms keep going off. We are trying to save medicine and also keep the doors from being kicked in. I asked her if anyone had traveled, any common exposure. She said not the same travel, not the same food, not the same church, not the same job. The only common thread is everybody watched the sky and decided it meant something. That sentence followed me for weeks. Not the bleeding, not the storm. The idea that belief itself could be the common exposure. By day 3, the first rumors of water problems started. Not in a mystical way, in a public works way. St. Louis pulls drinking water from the Mississippi River and the Missouri River. There are treatment plants, there are processes, coagulation, filtration, chlorination. The whole system is built on predictable inputs and stable power. You can treat a lot of things. You cannot treat everything, and you cannot treat anything if the pumps cannot run. A supervisor from the water division did not call into my show because people in government stopped talking to radio hosts once the situation felt political. Caleb pulled in a public statement off an online feed before the internet started breaking. The statement said a treatment plant had experienced chemical feed interruptions during the storm. It said the water remained safe. It also told people to boil water if they noticed discoloration. That last part is what people heard. Boil water. Then somebody posted a video of brown water coming out of a faucet in a suburb, and the whole region decided the river had turned poisonous. People emptied shelves. People fought over bottled cases. People who had never owned a camping stove started buying propane and using it indoors. And fire departments started responding to carbon monoxide alarms until their dispatch systems overloaded. On my 4th night, Marcus Bennett called. He was a long-haul truck driver, 42 years old, based out of Georgia. He told me he was parked on the shoulder of the Interstate 70 near Columbia, Missouri, because the fuel situation had turned into a mess. He had a refrigerated trailer with food. He sounded tired in the bones. Marcus said, Evan, I've been hauling freight since I was 19. I have seen hurricanes. I have seen snow shut down the plains. I have seen folks do dumb stuff in traffic, but this is something else. I left a distribution center outside Kansas City this morning with a mixed load. Canned goods, eggs, some dairy, some medicine, and coolers. Dispatch told me St. Louis was still taking deliveries. I hit the road and my phone navigation went dead twice. Not slow. Dead. Then it came back and it was wrong. It tried to send me down roads that were blocked by wrecks. I kept my head and used paper maps. You know what I have not touched in years. A paper map. I get close to Columbia. and there is a line of cars and trucks backed up, not for traffic, for fuel. A station had power, then lost it, then got it back on a generator. People were filling anything that could hold liquid. 5-gallon buckets, storage totes. I saw a man fill a trash bag with gasoline and tie it off with a shoelace. I wanted to slap him. I did not because his buddy had a pistol on his hip and his eyes looked empty. He paused, and I heard wind and distant shouting through his phone. Marcus said, "Here is why I called you." A group of people at that station were praying out loud. Not quiet, not private. They were blocking pumps. They were telling drivers to kneel. One guy kept saying the water is bitter and the blood is coming, and anybody who keeps driving is denying it. A woman was crying and telling her kid that the sky already gave the sign. Another guy tried to climb on my step and tell me the refrigerated trailer was a sin because it was keeping food cold while kids starved. I told him to get down. He did not. A fight started. The cops showed up, and it was 2 deputies, just 2, and they looked scared. They did not even try to arrest anybody. They just made a line and told people to move back. Marcus took a breath that sounded painful. Marcus said, then a man pulled a rifle out of his trunk and fired into the air. He screamed that the rider had come. I do not know what rider he meant. I have heard the language. I grew up in church. My mama would have slapped me for saying this on a Sunday. But that language is in the air right now. It is not comforting anybody. It is lighting folks up. I got my truck out of there because my job is to keep moving. And I am telling you, Evan, the roads are starting to feel dangerous from the living more than anything else. I asked him if he had heard anything official. National Guard, State Police, anything organized. He said he heard a rumor that the Guard was securing a fuel terminal. He said he saw a convoy on the far side of the highway with military vehicles and a couple of Humvees. And he said he did not get close because he did not want to be mistaken for a threat. After Marcus hung up, I sat back and stared at the studio wall where the acoustic foam was peeling at the corners. This was how civilization actually breaks. Not with one clean event, with 10,000 small decisions made under stress. Day 5, the second wave hit. The solar storm was fading, but the damage it started kept growing. Satellites had glitches. Some never recovered. Cell towers ran on batteries and generators, and fuel deliveries were not steady. Banks had network issues. People could not pull cash. Payroll deposits were delayed. Once you tell people the money is trapped behind a screen, people stop acting polite. That day, a dust haze rolled in from the west. There were wildfires in Oklahoma and Kansas from downed lines and dry wind, plus a few big grass fires that nobody could get ahead of because departments were stretched thin. The smoke pushed east. By afternoon, the sun looked dull behind it. Not dramatic, not beautiful. Dull. The kind of dull that makes you worry about lungs. People started quoting scripture on street corners. I am not mocking faith. I grew up around it. I know what it can do for people who are drowning. I am telling you what I saw. The quoting was not comfort. It was accusation. It was a way to pick a side before the sides were even real. On the air, I tried to keep it grounded. I said smoke from fires can travel hundreds of miles. I said particles in the air can irritate lungs and eyes. I told people to seal windows if they had asthma. I told them to keep a wet towel by the door if ash started coming down. I said, do not start a fight over whose God did this. Start by protecting your kids from breathing it. That night, Father Miguel Alvarez called in from Los Angeles, California. I had met him once years earlier at a community event when I was still doing local news. He remembered me. I remembered his voice because he spoke plain, no performance. He had become the kind of person people called when the world shook. Father Miguel said, Evan, I'm calling from the rectory behind St. Cecilia. I have the church doors locked. I have people inside, families, elderly, some homeless men who sleep near the freeway. We have water and some food. I'm not calling to preach at your listeners. I'm calling because the streets here are turning into a religious argument with fists. A group came to the church this afternoon and demanded we open the doors only for people who accept their statement of belief. They had printed it on paper. They wanted people to sign it. They said the apocalypse is here and any compromise is a mark. I told them the church is not a checkpoint. I told them no. His voice tightened, then steadied again. Father Miguel said, they did not accept no. They tried to push in. Some of my parishioners are men who served in the Marines. I do not run a militia. I do not want one. I also cannot let violent men take over this building. We pushed them back. There was shouting. Someone sprayed a fire extinguisher to break the crowd. The police came, but the police came late, and when the police arrived, half the crowd turned on the police and started calling them servants of the beast. That is the level of language now. Nobody is trying to solve anything. Everybody is trying to name the enemy. I asked him what he believed was happening. I wanted him to go one way or the other. Either confirm the prophecy angle or shut it down. He did neither. Father Miguel said, I believe people are afraid. I believe fear makes people reach for structure. Prophecy is structure. Conspiracy is structure. Both can become weapons. I have read Revelation. I have studied it. I also know earthquakes happen, disease happens, war happens. People have been wrong about the end of the world many times. Here is what is new, the speed, the connectivity. A rumor can travel faster than an ambulance. A video can turn a neighborhood into a battlefield in 10 minutes, so I am not going to tell you the date of the end. I am going to tell you this. If your listeners want to survive with their souls intact, they need to stop hunting enemies and start doing mercy. Bring water to the elderly. Share information that is verified. Do not beat someone because his prayer sounds different. I sat with that after he hung up. Then the power flickered again and the studio monitors snapped off for a second, and I went back to the practical voice, because practical voice is a shield. By the end of the week 1, the hemorrhagic illness Leah described had spread into multiple states. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention tried to brief the public, but the briefings got drowned by fighting about whether the agency was lying. Some politicians blamed foreign sabotage. Some pastors blamed sin. Some influencers blamed vaccination programs that never existed. People built towers of certainty on top of ignorance, and then defended them with weapons. St. Louis started getting its own cases. A man collapsed at a grocery store on Kings Highway. An employee called it a seizure. Someone filmed it. The clip hit the internet before the paramedics even arrived. The comments filled with prophecy language. Horsemen, trumpets, plague bowls. Then the clip got chopped into 10 versions with different captions and different claims. Nobody cared about the man on the floor. Everybody cared about winning their argument. The second sign happened on a Sunday afternoon. I hate calling it that because I still wanted everything to have a normal explanation. Around 3 in the afternoon, the light changed fast. Not gradual sunset. Fast. Streetlights clicked on. Birds got confused and went quiet. The sky did not go black. It went dim. A heavy gray, middle of the day, with no storm front. The weather radar showed scattered clouds, nothing special. I walked outside the studio and looked up, and my stomach tightened. There was a band across the sun. Not an eclipse the way you think, not a clean circle. A streak, dark and wide, cutting through light. The best physical explanation I could find was high-altitude particulate layers from the fires plus some stratospheric aerosol distribution from a volcanic event overseas that had been reported a day earlier. There had been an eruption in the North Atlantic region. Not the first one in history, not supernatural, but the timing stacked with everything else, and people did not care about physics. People cared about narrative. That night, the streets got loud. Not one protest, 100 small ones. Different corners, different banners, some chanting repentance, some chanting resistance, some demanding martial law, some demanding the government stand down. The police scanner turned into a loop of fights, fires, and units requesting backup, followed by silence. Caleb told me he wanted to go home. He had a wife and a little boy in Maplewood. He wanted to board up windows, fill the bathtub, sit in the dark, and keep his kid calm. I told him to go. I told him I would stay on air. That made me sound brave. It was not bravery. It was avoidance. I could not imagine sitting in my apartment alone with my thoughts while the world did this. I slept on the studio couch for 2 hours at a time. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom sink. I ate vending machine crackers and whatever canned food people brought by once the word spread that we were still broadcasting. I kept the doors locked and only opened them when I recognized a face through the peephole. A man tried to force the door one night, claiming he had a message from God that needed to be aired. I told him no. He screamed and kicked the door and left. 20 minutes later, I heard gunshots down the block. I did not know if it was connected. I did not want to know. At the start of week 2, Sergeant Dana Klein contacted me. She was with the Missouri National Guard. She did not give me a base name. She did not give me a unit number. She spoke careful and flat, the way public affairs people speak when every word can become gasoline. She asked if I could patch her through for a short statement. I said yes, and I told her I would not cut her off even if listeners yelled. Sergeant Klein said, "This is Sergeant Dana Klein with the Missouri National Guard. I'm speaking in coordination with state emergency management. I am not here to debate religion. I am not here to argue politics. I am here to tell residents what is happening on the ground. We are assisting with fuel distribution security at key terminals. We are assisting with water and supply delivery routes to hospitals and critical care facilities. We are providing support to local law enforcement where requested. Residents should avoid attempting to approach fuel terminals or convoys. Residents should not attempt to block roadways to demand supplies. If you need medical help, contact local emergency services. If phone service is limited, seek the nearest open clinic or emergency room. We are aware of misinformation claiming certain neighborhoods will be sealed or cleansed by force. Those claims are false. If you hear someone making threats, prioritize safety and leave the area. I asked her on air what the biggest risk was right now. She paused. That pause told me she was deciding whether to be honest or safe. Sergeant Klein said the biggest risk is uncontrolled crowds. The second biggest risk is people deciding the rule of law no longer applies and acting on that decision. If you have supplies, stay home. If you do not, go out early, go with a plan, and do not join a crowd that is chanting. Chanting crowds are not stable. After she hung up, the line lit up with callers wanting to argue with her. I did not put them through. I said, "You heard the message. Use it. If your goal is to win an argument, you are wasting your oxygen." That same week, the locust videos started. I am putting that word in quotes because I do not know what else to call it without triggering somebody. In parts of Texas and Oklahoma, huge swarms of insects hit agricultural areas. Real swarms. The kind entomologists have documented for centuries. Warmer winters, shifting weather patterns, disrupted pesticide supply chains, the kind of slow variables that suddenly become fast when the system is stressed. The videos showed fields moving with insects. Farmers with respirators trying to protect crops. People did not hear insect outbreak. People heard prophecy. Churches split overnight. Some congregations turned into relief centers. Others turned into tribunals. That sounds extreme. It also happened. A woman from Illinois drove to St. Louis and came to our locked door begging me to broadcast that her husband had been judged at their church for buying insulin from a pharmacy that required a digital payment, and she thought the payment system was a mark. She was crying and shaking and holding a paper bag of medication. She wanted me to tell her she was not condemned. I am a radio host, not a theologian. I told her she was a human trying to keep her husband alive, and that was not evil. She nodded, wiped her face, and left. Leah called again near the end of week 2. Her hospital was running out of blood products. Donation centers were closed in some areas because staff stopped coming. Refrigeration failures ruined stock. Transport disruptions delayed replacements. She told me, quietly, that the hemorrhagic illness was not the only thing anymore. They were getting a neurological syndrome too. People with tremors, confusion, sudden aggression, followed by exhaustion and collapse. She said the scariest part was not the symptoms. It was that families were hiding sick relatives because they thought hospitals were part of a spiritual trap. Leah said, "Evan, I am watching normal parents make choices that will kill their kids because a guy on a live stream told them the emergency room is a place where angels will sort them. I am watching people refuse antibiotics for infected wounds because they think pain is purification. I am watching people who have never been religious suddenly become religious in the meanest way. I have to go because we are moving patients into the stairwell to keep the hall clear. I just needed to tell somebody who will repeat it accurately. This is not just illness. This is belief turning into policy inside households." I repeated it accurately. I tried to soften it. I failed. The truth does not soften just because you want it to. Week 3 was when the international situation stopped being news and started being direct impact. Ports slowed. Then ports stopped. Insurance companies stopped covering shipments through certain corridors because crews were refusing. A ship can be built of steel and still be useless if the humans operating it think the world is ending. A plane can be full of fuel and still sit on a runway if the navigation network cannot be trusted. In St. Louis, the grocery stores had food, but the selection narrowed fast. Rice, beans, canned vegetables, canned meat. Fresh produce started looking tired. Meat prices jumped. Then the refrigerated cases started failing when stores could not keep generators fueled. The city still had power most hours, but the dips were constant. That killed equipment slowly. Compressors ran hot. Bearings wore out. Control boards fried. The kind of boring mechanical failures that become famine if you do not fix them. People started arming themselves openly. I am not anti-gun. I am anti-stupid. A weapon is a tool. A weapon in a crowd full of prophecy talk is a fuse. I watched two men argue in a parking lot over a case of water while both had pistols visible. Nobody drew. Nobody had to. The whole interaction had that frozen edge where one wrong word would have turned it into a shooting. That edge became normal. I kept broadcasting. I kept my voice low. I read city updates when I could verify them. I talked about safe water storage, about food spoilage, about keeping a small fire extinguisher in the kitchen because more people were cooking on improvised burners. I felt myself becoming a public service announcement with a pulse. I also felt something else happening in my chest, a shift I did not want. I was starting to track events in my head against the old prophetic checklist I had learned as a kid. I hated that. I hated that my brain was doing pattern matching because pattern matching is how humans stay sane. There was an earthquake in the Mediterranean region in week 3, a big one. Moment magnitude 7 point something. The footage showed collapsed buildings and dust. The quake itself was not impossible. Earthquakes happen. The timing and the fear made it land wrong. The quake turned into proof for millions of people who needed proof. Then there was an oil facility fire in the Middle East that knocked a chunk of production offline. Then a shipping lane got shut down by a naval incident. Then a protest turned into a massacre somewhere I could not verify because news agencies were losing communications. Each event had its own logic. Together, they felt coordinated even if they were not. Father Miguel called again. His voice sounded older. Father Miguel said, "Evan, I have been doing funerals without bodies. Families come in and show me a photo on a phone and ask me to pray over an absence. I have people showing up with bruised faces because they got jumped for wearing a cross, and I have people showing up with bruised faces because they do not wear a cross. I have never seen religion used this fast as a sorting mechanism. The worst part is that some of the people doing violence believe they are doing good." He told me a story about a woman named Rosa who cleaned offices for a living and had been feeding her neighbor's kids because the neighbor got sick. A group showed up and demanded Rosa hand over food because they said her charity was interfering with judgment. Rosa refused. They beat her. Father Miguel said he treated the cuts himself because the clinics nearby were closed. He said he felt rage, and he said he hated himself for it, because rage is how you become what you fear. I sat with that story and thought about how many Rosas were out there, doing the real work of holding things together, while louder people screamed about seals and bowls. On week 4, the sky did something again. This time it was a sound. I need to be careful describing this because I can already hear the comments. It was not musical. It was not angelic. It was a low, sustained tone in the air, heard across wide areas, reported by people in different states within the same hour. The best explanation I found was atmospheric resonance, triggered by a combination of pressure gradients and distant industrial noise, plus infrastructure humming under irregular electrical load. High-voltage transmission lines can sing. Substations can vibrate. Wind can carry it. People did not want that explanation. People wanted the word trumpet. When the hum started in St. Louis, it rolled through the neighborhood and made window glass quiver. I went out to the alley, stood by the generator cage, and listened. It was real. It was physical. It stopped after maybe 7 minutes. Those 7 minutes did more damage than some riots because it gave the prophecy crowd a sensory anchor. You can argue with a headline. You cannot argue with something you heard with your own ears. That night, the first organized purity patrols appeared in some suburbs. Groups of men with rifles setting up improvised checkpoints. Some claimed to be protecting neighborhoods. Some were stealing. Some were recruiting. It did not matter. The effect was the same. Movement got dangerous. Ambulances got stopped. Supply runs got delayed. People started dying because the roads had turned into arguments. Sergeant Klein called again, this time off schedule. Her voice was clipped. Sergeant Klein said, "Evan, I am going to be blunt. We have confirmed armed groups impersonating official authority. If someone stops you and claims to be federal, state, National Guard, or police, ask for identification and do not comply with demands that are not related to immediate safety. If you feel threatened, disengage. Turn around. Do not escalate. These groups want confrontation. They want to force a story. We are not everywhere. We cannot be everywhere. I need your listeners to avoid becoming part of somebody else's narrative." I asked her if the state was still functioning. I asked her because my audience needed to hear it said out loud. Sergeant Klein said, The state is functioning in pieces. Some counties have strong leadership. Some are collapsing into local rule. Some sheriffs are doing the job. Some are choosing sides. If you want the truth, Evan, the uniform does not guarantee character. Character is what matters now. That line made my throat tighten. I thanked her and promised I would not turn the show into a debate stage. By week 5, the hemorrhagic illness had a name people used, then stopped using, because names turned into political fights. The public health advice stayed boring and consistent. Avoid crowds, wash hands, boil water if you are told to, wear a mask in packed indoor spaces. People rejected those steps not because they were hard, but because the steps implied the crisis was physical, not spiritual, and millions of people had decided the crisis had to mean something bigger. I started doing something I had avoided. I started reading small sections of scripture on air, not to preach, but to address the fact that half my listeners were using it as a map. I would read a few lines, then I would talk about what the text actually said historically, how people have interpreted it differently for centuries, how apocalyptic literature uses symbols, how it has been used by leaders to control crowds. I tried to do it respectfully. The prophecy crowd still hated me because I would not confirm their exact version. The skeptical crowd hated me because they wanted me to mock it. I refused both. That was when I realized the broadcast had shifted from entertainment to documentation. I was no longer trying to calm people. I was trying to leave a record that one person someday could use to understand how it felt when institutions cracked. Caleb stopped coming back. His wife told me over a text that his son had asthma and the smoke and stress were too much. Caleb was boarding up, conserving fuel, staying quiet. He apologized. I told him not to. I envied him. Week 6, the communications network took a step down that it did not recover from. Internet service became intermittent in whole regions. Some areas had local connectivity but no reliable backbone. The cell network got patchy. You would see bars, then calls would not go through. Texts would arrive hours late. That did something ugly to people. Modern humans are used to instant confirmation. Without it, imagination fills the gap. Imagination under stress becomes terror. I started getting more visitors at the studio door. Not random. People who had heard we were still on air. A couple brought canned food. One brought medical supplies. A quiet woman named Denise, mid-50s, worked maintenance at a community college. She did not become a character on the show because she did not want her voice out there. She helped me change filters in the building and showed me how to siphon fuel from a dead lawn tractor behind the building. She said, "You can talk. I can fix. That is the trade." One night I heard chanting down the block, and I killed the studio lights and sat in the dark with the mic muted, listening to footsteps and voices pass. They did not stop at our door. I waited 10 minutes after silence before I went back live. I told listeners what happened in plain words. I said, if you are moving at night, do not walk into a crowd. If you hear chanting, you do not join it. You leave. In week 7, Leah called and told me she had quit the hospital. Her voice shook once, then steadied. Leah said, "Evan, I am not a hero. I am not doing martyr stuff. I left because the hospital is becoming a battlefield and I am more useful outside it. We had armed people show up and demand we stop treating patients they labeled unclean. They were not joking. They were organized. They had radios, they had armbands. Security tried to stop them. It turned into a shooting. I did not get hit. 2 people did. I watched a nurse I trained with bleed on a tile floor while somebody screamed scripture. I am done." She said she was joining a small mobile clinic group operating out of a church basement, focusing on basic care, antibiotics, wound cleaning, hydration, childbirth. She said it felt more real than trying to maintain a modern hospital system without modern supply chains. She said she was tired of seeing people die for symbolic reasons. Leah said, "I still do not know if this is divine. I still do not know if this is human sabotage. I still do not know if this is a chain of disasters that lined up and made us lose our minds. I know one thing. If God is watching what we do to each other." After she said that, my eyes got hot and I had to clear my throat before I could speak. I did not want to cry on air because it makes listeners feel helpless, and helpless people make dangerous decisions. I thanked her and told her to stay safe. Week 8 brought the first real famine signs in parts of the world, and you could feel it here even before stomachs got empty. It showed up in how fast people turned on neighbors. It showed up in thefts from pantries. It showed up in parents lying to kids about dinner. It showed up in hospitals cutting meals. Marcus called again. He was not on Interstate 70 anymore. He was in Tennessee, near Nashville, sleeping in his cab behind a warehouse fence with other drivers because convoys were forming for safety. He said there were armed escorts, not official, just drivers and local volunteers with rifles. He said the convoy system was the only thing keeping freight moving in some corridors. Marcus said, "Evan, I want to tell you something straight. I am a church guy. I believe in God. I'm not ashamed of it. But what I am seeing on the road is not God's people getting closer to God. It is people using God's name as a brand for power. I watched a group stop a convoy and demand the drivers hand over a percentage of supplies as a tithe to their leader. They had a preacher with a microphone and a speaker system running off a generator. He was screaming that his group was chosen to redistribute. When the drivers refused, the group started firing warning shots into the dirt. That is not tithing. That is robbery with a hymn. He told me he had a 9mm pistol in his cab, legal, and he hoped he would never use it. He said he had started sleeping in his boots. He said he missed the old world, where the worst thing on a haul was a flat tire in the rain. I asked him if he had seen any signs people were talking about. He laughed once, a dry sound. Marcus said, "Evan, the sign I see is people deciding that rules do not apply if you can quote the right verse. I see that sign at every fuel line." That was the first time I heard someone say it that plainly. Week 9, the darkness came back. It was not total. It was a global dimming effect in the mid-latitudes for parts of the day, connected to smoke, aerosols, and cloud anomalies. Weather patterns got erratic. Storms formed fast. Hailstorms hit cities that were already stressed. Power lines came down, fires started. The firefighting response was uneven. In some neighborhoods, residents put out fires themselves with garden hoses and buckets. In others, entire blocks burned because nobody showed up. I kept broadcasting, and I noticed my voice had changed. Not dramatic, harder, less joking. I stopped trying to sound friendly and started trying to sound useful. Then the global religious conflict piece snapped into place in a way I could not ignore. It was not one war, it was dozens. Communities turning into factions, factions turning into militias, militias turning into new governments. Some of those governments were secular and brutal. Some were religious and brutal. Brutal did not belong to one ideology. Brutal belonged to stress and hunger and fear. In St. Louis, a group tried to take over a food distribution point at a high school. They claimed divine authority. They were armed. The police backed off. The school staff backed off. Parents backed off. The group started deciding who deserved food. Some people got turned away for the wrong prayer. Some got turned away for tattoos. Some got turned away for being the wrong ethnicity. That is where prophecy turned into policy. I heard about it from Denise, the maintenance woman. She had a cousin who worked at the school. Denise said, "They are handing out food with a sermon and a threat. Kids are watching. You cannot undo that." I went on air and described it without naming the group, because naming the group would recruit for them. I said, "If you are at a distribution and it turns into a screening and a threat, leave. Food is not worth dying for if there is another option. If there is no other option, go with someone. Go early, keep your head down. Do not argue." That was my moral line in those days. Survival first, pride later. By week 10, the government messages got weird. Not because the messages became religious, because they became fragmented. One agency would say, "Stay calm." Another would say, "Prepare for extended outages." Another would say, "Evacuate certain areas." Another would say, "Do not evacuate." It was not a conspiracy. It was bureaucracy under collapse. It was departments losing data, losing staff, losing internal communications, then doing their best anyway. People interpreted contradictions as lies. Some were lies. Some were mistakes. The public stopped distinguishing. That made the public easier to steer by anybody willing to speak with certainty. Father Miguel called one last time from Los Angeles. He sounded tired beyond tired. Father Miguel said, "Evan, I do not know how much longer I can keep the church doors open. We have been feeding people, but our supplies are low. We had a group try to set the building on fire because they said, 'We are harboring the wrong kind of faithful.' We put it out. Nobody died." I keep thinking about that sentence, nobody died. That is the bar now. Evan, if you can keep talking, keep talking. Words are one of the few tools left that can reach across a line without bullets. I asked him if he was afraid. He answered honestly. Father Miguel said, "Yes, I am afraid. I am also stubborn. I am still going to say Mass. I am still going to bury the dead. I am still going to tell violent men that they do not speak for God. If I die for that, that is between me and God. I am not asking your listeners to do what I do. I am asking them to stop making the apocalypse worse with their own hands." When he hung up, I did not feel inspired. I felt crushed, because he was right and because it was not working. Around week 11, the broadcast itself became risky. A group started monitoring local stations trying to control messaging. They wanted to shut down anything that did not support their narrative. Denise warned me. Sergeant Klein hinted at it in a careful way. Leah told me the same dynamic was happening in Dallas. It was happening everywhere because the control of information is control of crowds. So I changed how I operated. I stopped advertising that the studio location was staffed. I stopped taking random walk-ins. I kept the door locked always. I started recording segments onto simple portable recorders as backup. So if someone forced me off the air, I could still leave a record. I also started sleeping with a weapon nearby, a plain old pump shotgun that Denise's brother loaned me, 12 gauge, kept unloaded with shells in a separate place because I did not trust myself to keep my judgment clean when half asleep. I am telling you that because this is what apocalypse looks like in real life, not demons in the street. A tired man in a radio studio learning firearm safety at 2 a.m. because society stopped enforcing basic norms. In week 12, the plague without clear cause changed again. The hemorrhagic cases continued. But now there were also respiratory clusters, severe and fast. Some people called it secondary infections. Some called it engineered. Some called it spiritual attack. Leah called it what it looked like from her side, a system that could not keep up with multiple overlapping outbreaks while supply chains were shredded. Hospitals can handle surges. They cannot handle the world breaking at the same time. The first time I saw a refrigerated medicine delivery arrive at a St. Louis hospital with armed escort, I understood how fragile modern medicine is. That delivery depended on fuel, drivers, security, functioning roads, functioning bridges, functioning traffic systems, functioning refrigeration, functioning inventory systems, and staff to unload and store it. Take away 3 of those, and people die. By month 4, the city sounded different at night. Fewer cars. More distant bangs. Sometimes gunshots. Sometimes transformers blowing. Sometimes just people yelling. The air smelled of smoke more often than it smelled clean. The river still moved. The sky still turned from dark to light. Life kept doing its routines while humans fell apart inside it. I started receiving handwritten notes pushed under the studio door. People were afraid to talk on the phone. One note said, "My sister says we must leave before the angels seal the city." Another said, "Do not trust the guard. They are marking doors." Another said, "Thank you for telling us to boil water. My son stopped throwing up." The notes were proof that the audience was not one thing. The audience was a crowd of minds in collision. Sergeant Klein disappeared from my lines after month 4. Not dead, I do not know. Quiet. That is worse in its own way. Marcus stopped calling too. Leah called once more, brief, to say she was alive and moving with her clinic. She told me, "Keep your head down." Then her line dropped and I never got her again. So it became me, Denise, and a studio that felt smaller every day. Denise started sleeping in the building sometimes because traveling across the city got riskier. She would sit in the break room and eat cold beans and listen to me talk on air, and she would shake her head when I said something too hopeful. She kept me honest. Denise said one night, "Evan, you keep trying to convince people this is fixable. Some of it is. Some of it is not. You should talk to the people who are doing the fixable part, and you should stop wasting breath on the folks who want to burn it all down for a prophecy." She was right. I shifted the show again. Less debate, more instructions, more verification, more documentation of what worked in real neighborhoods. Who set up a shared generator schedule? Who built a water hauling team? Who created a quiet patrol to keep fires from spreading without turning into a gang? Those stories mattered. They also got dangerous, because any example of stability became a target for predators. So I started anonymizing details, stripping out addresses, stripping out names when needed. The weirdest part, the part I still cannot fully explain, is that the more I stripped out drama, the more the world gave it anyway. A mass die-off of fish in a section of the Mississippi, likely from oxygen depletion and runoff, after heavy storms became the waters turned to blood in people's mouths. A severe hailstorm that shattered roofs and smashed cars became fire from the sky in people's mouths. A 3-day period of heavy smoke dimming daylight became the sun was darkened in people's mouths. I'm not telling you the Bible predicted weather. I'm telling you that humans are pattern machines, and once a pattern gets into the mind, it will recruit evidence until it feels inevitable. That recruitment process became the real disaster. It made people stop cooperating across lines. It made every problem a moral test instead of an engineering problem. It made every neighbor a suspect. Month 5 is when the conflict hit my street. A group of men came down South Grand in the afternoon armed, with signs and a truck with loudspeakers. They were calling for cleansing. They were calling for repentance. They were naming targets. They stopped at businesses owned by immigrants and threw rocks. They stopped at a small mosque and tried to force the doors. People inside held the doors shut. A gunshot went off, then another, then screaming. I was in the studio. I heard it through the window glass. Denise was in the back room. She grabbed her phone and tried to call someone. The call did not go through. She looked at me and said, "Do not open that door for anybody." I went on air. I told people what was happening in the simplest words I could. I said, "There is an armed crowd moving on South Grand. Do not approach. Do not join. If you are in the area, shelter inside, away from windows." I did not name the group. I did not repeat their slogans. I did not give them my microphone. I gave the neighborhood a warning. A half hour later, the crowd moved on. The street was littered with glass. A man lay on the sidewalk with a leg wound. Not fatal, but bleeding. A woman pressed a towel to it. 2 strangers carried him into a doorway. The ambulance did not come for 40 minutes. When it did, it came with a police escort, and the police looked exhausted. That was civilization in one frame. Blood on concrete. Strangers helping. Slow response. Fear everywhere. That night, Denise and I talked without the mic on. She asked me if I still thought this was just cascading failures and mass psychology. I told her I did not know anymore. That is the honest truth. There were explanations for each event. There were also too many events aligning with too many old descriptions. The alignment could be coincidence amplified by human bias. It could be something else. I do not have enough information to declare cosmic truth. I only have enough information to say humans are failing their own test. The next morning I went live and said something I had avoided for months. I said, if this is the end of the world, it will not be because a voice in the sky told us to hurt each other. It will be because we chose to. I regret phrasing it that way because it sounded too clean. I was tired. My brain was running on fumes. I corrected myself later and said, there are forces we cannot control. Disease, weather, power systems, governments collapsing. Still, the way you treat the person next to you is the part you own. Month 6, the studio generator died. It did not explode. It did not catch fire. It just wore out. Oil changes missed. Parts delayed. It coughed one afternoon and then it refused to hold load. Denise and I tried to baby it. We cleaned filters, we checked fuel, we did what we could. It would run for 10 minutes and then voltage would sag and the transmitter would cut. So we moved, not far. A friend of Denise had a basement in Tower Grove South with a small inverter system and a quiet generator. The friend had left town weeks earlier, heading north to family. He left keys with Denise. The basement was dry, it had a workbench, shelves, and enough space to set up a smaller rig. We carried what we could. Microphone, portable recorder, a small transmitter, cables, batteries. We did it at dawn because moving gear across the city at night was asking for trouble. In that basement, the broadcast turned into something simpler. No call-in lines, too risky, too unreliable. It became me talking, and sometimes Denise chiming in with logistics updates, and me reading verified notes from runners who moved between neighborhoods. We became a bulletin board for survival, and sometimes a confessional for a city that needed to hear a human voice. I started each broadcast with the same sentence. This is Evan Mercer. I am still alive. I am still talking. I said it because I wanted listeners to anchor on something stable. I also said it because I needed to hear myself say it. The apocalypse part, the biblical part, did not show up in a single cinematic moment. It showed up in the slow death of shared reality. It showed up in families splitting because one person believed the neighbor was cursed. It showed up in men with rifles turning faith into a border. It showed up in public health turning into heresy. It showed up in mercy becoming suspicious. Sometimes I would take a breath and almost say out loud that I thought the prophecy was real. Then I would remember all the times humans predicted the end and were wrong. Then I would remember the hum in the sky and the bleeding in Leah's hospital and the dimming light and the insects and the violence wrapped in scripture, and my throat would tighten again. I stayed in the only lane I could defend. I documented. I advised. I refused to declare cosmic certainty because I did not want to become one more man selling certainty for influence. On the last day I am recording in this segment, it is a Tuesday. The calendar says October. The temperature in the basement is 64 degrees Fahrenheit. I know because Denise has a cheap thermometer taped to a wooden post. The city above us is quiet in the morning, then loud in the afternoon, then quiet again at night. There are still pockets of power. There are still pockets of water. There are still pockets of law. There are also pockets of chaos that spread when stress spikes. I got a runner note yesterday that a neighborhood 2 miles away started a shared kitchen, families cooking together to save fuel. That is the sort of thing that rebuilds a society. I also got a runner note that a different neighborhood 2 miles away executed a man for stealing bread. That is the sort of thing that ends one. So if you are hearing this, if your receiver still has batteries, if your ears are still willing to listen, here is what I can tell you without lying. The sky did things that scared people. Disease hit in waves. Systems failed. Governments fractured. Faith became gasoline for some people and medicine for others. The old prophetic language became a weapon in the mouths of men who wanted power. The world did not end all at once. It got dismantled by fear, then by hunger, then by certainty. If you want to call this biblical, you can. If you want to call it mass psychology, riding a chain of disasters, you can. If you want to call it geopolitical manipulation, you can. I do not have proof that satisfies every mind. I have proof that humans can turn any crisis into a moral war, and that moral war can do more damage than the crisis itself. The runner note I promised to read is from a man who signs his name as Trent Wallace. I have never met him face to face. He drops notes through a side door at a grocery that still opens 2 mornings a week. Then somebody brings those notes to Denise. Trent says he is a former utility worker, 37 years old, living near Dutchtown with his sister and her 2 kids. He writes in block letters, clean and steady, like he does not want emotion to smear the facts. Trent wrote, 2 distribution sites closed after fights, one in LeMay, one near North County. Food got rerouted to a church on Natural Bridge with armed volunteers. Volunteers are not letting people in unless they agree to be searched. Searches include phones, bags, pockets. People who refuse get turned away. Argument turned into gunfire at 8:20 in the morning. 1 man dead, 1 woman hit in the shoulder. Ambulance did not enter until the crowd dispersed. A second group is setting up a checkpoint near the river access road, claiming it is to stop looters. They are taking fuel from anyone with a can. If you need fuel, do not go near the river today. When I read that out loud, my mouth went dry. I have lived in St. Louis long enough to know the river is not just scenery. The river is freight, fuel, chemicals, grain, construction materials. If something goes wrong on the river, it ripples into everything. Denise was standing next to me in the basement, listening with her arms folded. The little inverter fan hummed on the shelf behind her, trying to keep air moving in a room that was starting to smell of sweat and old wood. Denise said, River Access Road checkpoint means someone is trying to control barges. That is bigger than some neighborhood patrol. I said, how does anybody control barges without a port authority? Denise said, you do not control the barge. You control the truck that comes from the barge. You control the road. You control the forklift. You control the men with guns who decide who gets to leave with fuel. It is not complicated. It is ugly. Around noon the same day, the city proved her right. A barge hit something it should not have hit. I did not see it with my own eyes. I heard it as a distant heavy thump that made the basement ceiling dust drift down. Then I heard sirens rolling toward the river. Then I heard the scanner traffic on the little receiver we kept. The dispatcher voice kept trying to stay calm while units talked over each other. There were words that made my stomach tighten. Rail spur, chemical, wind shift, evacuation radius. Denise and I looked at each other. Denise did not ask questions. She started moving. She grabbed the paper city map she kept folded in her jacket pocket. She marked our location with a pen. She marked the river corridor. She listened to the scanner and moved her finger along streets, tracing how a plume could travel if the wind pushed southeast. The official message came late, and it came broken. A partial alert pushed through to some phones and not others. A loudspeaker truck drove down a few streets telling people to shelter indoors. Shelter indoors is the phrase people use when they do not have enough information to evacuate correctly. It is also the phrase that makes people panic because shelter indoors means you are trusting your walls to keep something out. I went on air and said what I could verify. I said there was an incident along the river industrial corridor. I said if you can smell chemicals, you need to get inside, close windows, turn off fans pulling in outside air, and move to an interior room. I said if you have a wet towel, put it at the base of the door. I said do not drive toward the river out of curiosity. Curiosity gets you dead in a chemical event. Then the smell reached us, faint at first, then stronger. It was not smoke. It was sharp and biting, like a pool supply aisle, like bleach turned hot. Denise swore under her breath. She said, "Chlorine," or something close enough that we treat it the same. We are not staying here. The decision was not dramatic. It was fast. You do not debate when your lungs are at risk. Denise shoved gear into a duffel, the microphone, the recorder, spare batteries, our small transmitter, the cables, the receiver, the paper notes. I grabbed water jugs and the shotgun case. We killed the inverter, unplugged everything, and moved up the basement stairs with our shirts pulled over our mouths. Outside, the air stung my eyes. People on the street were confused. Some were walking with kids, heads down, moving away from the river. Some were standing on porches arguing about whether the alert was real. One man was filming the sky and yelling that this was judgment. Denise did not stop. Denise does not argue with strangers while the air burns. We had an old sedan in the driveway behind the house, a faded blue thing with a dented bumper. We had kept it fueled as best we could, never full, never empty, always enough to move if we had to. Denise threw the duffel in the back seat and told me to start the engine. The car hesitated, then turned over. The dashboard lights looked dim. The battery was old. I whispered, "Come on," like the engine could hear me. We drove west, away from the river, away from downtown, toward higher ground and cleaner air. The streets were half jammed with people doing the same thing, and half empty because some neighborhoods had already been drained by earlier violence. It felt wrong to call it an evacuation because no one was guiding it. It was a scatter, a leak in a crowd. At an intersection near a small park, a group had set up a makeshift checkpoint with shopping carts and plywood. Not an official checkpoint, just people with weapons and a belief that roads belong to whoever stands in them. Denise slowed but did not stop. I saw 2 rifles, 1 shotgun, and a man holding a baseball bat, like it mattered against a vehicle. Denise rolled her window down a crack and shouted, "Chemical event! We are moving away! Do not block the road!" The man with the bat yelled back, "You are not taking supplies out. That is theft." Denise yelled, "You want to breathe chlorine. Be my guest." She did not wait for permission. She drove around the shopping cart, tires bumping the curb, and we kept going. My hands were sweating on my knees even though I was not driving. I kept staring at the rearview mirror, expecting headlights to chase us. None did. That is the thing about armed people posturing. A lot of them want compliance, not a fight. A fight costs bullets and bandages. We ended up at a small auto repair shop owned by a friend of Denise's friend. The owner's name was Ron Haskins, late 40s, grease under his nails, calm voice. He did not ask for a speech. He looked at Denise's face and nodded once, then opened the garage bay and waved us in. The garage smelled of oil, rubber, and stale coffee. The doors rolled down behind us, and for a moment the air stopped biting my eyes. Ron said, "You got the radio gear?" Denise said, "Yes, we might need a corner." Ron said, "You can have the office. I got a generator out back. It is loud and it drinks fuel, but it runs. I've been using it to keep my freezer cold and charge folks' phones when they act sane." We set up in his cramped office behind a glass window. There was a desk with a calendar still flipped to a month that felt like another lifetime. There were family photos, Ron with a teenage daughter at a soccer field, Ron holding a fish on a dock, Ron smiling in a way that looked impossible now. We laid the microphone on the desk, taped the cable down so it would not pull loose, and powered the inverter through a car battery Ron kept on a charger. The sound quality was worse. I did not care. Being heard was the point. I went live again and told listeners we had relocated temporarily due to the chemical incident. I told them the shelter guidance again. I repeated it twice because people in panic missed the first pass. I told them if they are in the plume area and they cannot shelter safely, move crosswind, not downwind, and do not drive toward water thinking it will help. Chemical gases sit in low areas. Water does not save you from inhalation. 2 hours later, the coughing started across the city. Not everywhere. Pockets. People sheltering in basements that pulled in bad air through old vents. People using fans that sucked the plume into their living rooms. People driving with windows down because they thought fresh air was the solution. I heard it on calls that got through before the phone networks died again. A mother named Candace called from a bathroom with her 2 kids, voice ragged, saying her eyes were burning and she could not stop coughing. I told her to wet towels, to seal the bottom of the door, to turn off the furnace, to breathe slow through cloth, and to call emergency services repeatedly, even if it did not connect. I do not know if she made it. That is the part that keeps eating at me, the missing endings. That night, the winds shifted and the chemical bite faded. The incident left a scar anyway. It shut down river movement for days. It pushed people out of neighborhoods already stressed. It gave armed groups a new reason to control roads. It also gave the prophecy crowd a new trophy. I heard it the next morning from a man shouting on a corner near the shop, yelling that the waters were corrupted and the air was poison and the seal had opened. Ron listened to me on a little battery radio while he worked on a truck. After the chemical event, he started keeping his bay door closed more, not because he was scared, but because he had learned what attention brings. Too many people show up asking for help, then a few show up demanding it. 2 days later, we got our first direct threat. A note slid under the garage door early in the morning. I watched Ron pick it up with a rag, read it, and go still. Then he walked into the office and set the note on the desk without a word. Denise read it first. I watched her jaw clench. The note said in messy handwriting, "Stop broadcasting lies. You are keeping the unclean calm. This is the purge. If you keep talking, we will silence you." Ron said, "You need to leave, not because I do not want you, because I do not want a firefight in my shop with my daughter hiding in the back room." Denise did not argue. She nodded once. That is what she does when a risk becomes unacceptable. You do not cling to a location because of pride. You move before the wrong men arrive. We waited until midday when the streets were busier, because moving gear in a crowd is safer than moving in silence. We loaded the car fast. Ron handed Denise a small jerry can of fuel and a box of spare fuses. He said, "If you burn out that inverter, you are done. Keep the fuses." Denise hugged him. Ron did not hug back. He just patted her shoulder and turned away, trying not to show emotion. We drove to a parking garage near a medical office building that had been half abandoned since the clinics closed. Denise had a key card from someone she knew through maintenance work. The garage was concrete and smelled of damp dust. The upper levels had a view of the street without being obvious. We parked behind a pillar where the car would not be seen from outside. We set up the microphone and recorder again in the car, using the vehicle battery and the inverter, running the engine only in short bursts to recharge. Denise made a schedule. 20 minutes on air, then off. 10 minutes engine running with the garage door open enough to vent, then off. She watched for exhaust accumulation with a cheap carbon monoxide detector she had scavenged from a hardware shelf weeks earlier. The little detector beeped once, and we both froze, then realized it was a low battery warning. Denise replaced the battery and taped the detector to the dashboard where we could see it. That night, as I spoke into the mic with the car windows cracked and my voice low to keep it from echoing, I realized something hard. The broadcast was now a moving target. That felt absurd. Like I was pretending to be important. I was not important. The voice was important. The record was important. The ability for someone to hear a calm, human sentence was important. That was enough. I got one more call from Sergeant Dana Klein. The connection was bad and kept clipping out, but I recognized her tone immediately. Sergeant Klein said, "Evan, if you are still transmitting, keep location private. We have reports of coordinated efforts to seize communication points. Not government, not foreign, just domestic factions. Some of these groups are blending religious language with control tactics. They are using checkpoints, ration cards, forced attendance gatherings. If you report on them, do not name leaders. Do not describe exact locations. Do not become their advertisement. I asked her what the guard was doing now. I asked because listeners kept believing soldiers were either saviors or demons, and neither story matched reality. Sergeant Klein said, "We are stretched. We are supporting critical infrastructure as best we can. We are escorting medical shipments when we have fuel. We are also pulling back from areas where engagement would turn into a firefight that helps nobody. I am not proud of that. It is math. You cannot hold every block. You hold the pumps, the hospitals, the substations, and hope communities hold the rest." Before the line died, she said one more thing, softer than her official voice. "Evan, if you can keep your show focused on practical survival, you will save more lives than you know." After she dropped, Denise stared at the car dashboard for a long moment. She said, "Hold the pumps, the hospitals, the substations. That is not apocalypse language. That is triage language." The catastrophes kept stacking, not because the universe was theatrical, but because systems are connected. Once one breaks, it knocks another. The chemical incident slowed river logistics. That slowed fuel distribution. Fuel shortages reduced emergency response. Reduced response let fires spread. Fires pushed smoke into the air again. Smoke stressed lungs. Stressed lungs made respiratory illness worse. Hospitals that were already under pressure got hit harder. That is how the ladder collapses, rung by rung. On a cold morning in what should have been a calm fall week, the first real freeze hit early. Not record-breaking, just early enough to catch people off guard. Pipes burst in buildings that had lost steady heat. Water mains cracked. Streets iced over because plows were short on fuel. Car crashes blocked intersections. Ambulances got delayed. In the garage, I could see my breath when I spoke because the concrete held cold. Denise wrapped her hands around a mug of lukewarm water and said, "Winter is going to kill more people than the plague." That day I talked on air about pipes and cold, about letting faucets drip to prevent freezing if you still had pressure, about keeping a small space heater away from blankets, about never running a generator inside a building. I told listeners that carbon monoxide is silent and it will kill you while you sleep. I told them if they must use a propane heater, they need ventilation and a detector. I said it again and again until my throat hurt. I got a brief message from Leah through a relay chain, not a live call. A written note dictated to somebody with a working phone that later got typed and brought to me. It was short, and it felt like it had been written with shaking hands. Leah's message said, "Still alive. Clinic moved north of Dallas. We are treating frostbite already because people are using water for heat and failing. We got raided once, lost antibiotics, no one killed. Keep telling people about carbon monoxide and boiling water. People still listen to you. Do not stop." I read her words out loud in the car. Then I sat with my forehead against the steering wheel for a moment, breathing slow. Denise did not touch me. She gave me space, which is its own kind of kindness. That week, a rumor hit the city that a sealed zone was coming. People said the guard would lock bridges and cut off neighborhoods. The rumor spread because it fit prophecy language and because it fit fear. The truth was more boring and more brutal. Authorities were restricting access to certain areas because of chemical contamination and violence, not because of divine sorting. It did not matter. The rumor caused stampedes. People tried to cross the bridges at the same time. One bridge had a vehicle fire in the middle of it and traffic stopped dead. People abandoned cars and ran. Somebody started shooting in the air to push the crowd. That turned into real shooting. The bridge became a border exactly the way Sergeant Klein warned. In the garage, Denise said, "We need to stop talking about what is true and start talking about what people will do. People will do the dangerous thing first. Plan for that." So I changed the tone again. I started telling listeners to avoid bridges during peak rumor hours. I told them if they need to cross, do it at dawn when crowds are smaller. I told them not to carry visible valuables. I told them to keep hands visible if confronted. I told them to turn around before an argument starts. I hated saying it because it felt like surrendering public space to bullies. It was not surrender. It was survival math. 2 nights later, someone entered the parking garage. I heard footsteps on the concrete rampart above us, slow and deliberate. Denise killed the mic instantly and pointed at the car keys. We sat in silence with the engine off, listening. The footsteps stopped. A voice echoed male, calling out, "Anybody down here?" Denise leaned close and whispered, "Do not answer." The voice called again, closer. "I know you got power in here. I saw the light." My stomach tightened. We had been careful. No lights, no engine noise. Then I realized the car's small power indicator on the inverter was glowing faint through the window. A tiny dot of green in a dark garage can be a beacon. The footsteps approached. I could see a silhouette between pillars, a man, broad shoulders, something long in his hands. A rifle, most likely. He was not sprinting. He was not panicking. That steadiness scared me more. Panic can be negotiated with. Steady intent is different. Denise mouthed, "Go," and I turned the key. The engine caught loud in the concrete space. The man jerked toward the sound. Denise shouted, "Back up," and I threw the car into reverse. Tires squealed. The man raised the rifle. I saw the outline clear enough to know he was aiming, not waving. I did not wait for a shot. I slammed the brake, shifted into drive, and punched it forward toward the exit ramp. The car bounced over a speed bump. The man fired once. The sound cracked and echoed. I felt something smack the rear quarter panel, a hard punch of metal. The car kept moving. Denise was yelling directions even though there was only one way out. I kept my eyes on the ramp and the thin strip of streetlight at the top. We hit the street and did not stop for 4 blocks. I did not know if he was chasing. I did not want to find out at a red light. I ran stop signs carefully, slowing enough not to die, but not stopping enough to get boxed in. Denise watched mirrors. Her face was pale. She kept repeating, keep moving," like she was talking to the engine. We pulled into a different neighborhood and parked behind a row of dumpsters, out of sight, and sat with the engine off, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. Denise looked at the bullet dent in the rear panel and said flat, "That was a warning or he is a bad shot." I said, "He was hunting the broadcast." Denise said, "Yes, and he will keep hunting." That was the moment the story turned again. Not because the world got darker in a poetic way, because my risk calculation changed. I had been assuming that as long as I stayed small and useful, nobody would bother. That assumption died in a parking garage under a gunshot echo. We drove to the edge of the city before dawn and found a small maintenance yard Denise knew, fenced, quiet, with a cinder block shed and a heavy steel door. The yard belonged to nobody official anymore. It belonged to the men who still cared enough to lock it. Denise had a key. She did not explain where she got it. I did not ask. Inside the shed was a workbench, a few shelves, and a corner with old traffic cones and a box of road flares. There was also a roof that did not leak and a door that would not splinter from one kick. We moved the gear inside and set up again, smaller than ever. We ran power from a deep cycle battery Denise had scavenged weeks earlier and kept charged through short engine runs. We kept lights off. We spoke low. We broadcast in short bursts. On air, I told listeners something I had avoided because it sounded paranoid. I said, "If you are hearing this, understand the broadcast may cut out without warning. Not because the world ended in one moment. Because someone might decide a calm voice is dangerous." Then I did what I've done since the first Aurora. I returned to the basics. Boil water if you are not sure. Stay away from crowds chanting. Do not run generators indoors. Keep warm without burning your house down. Do not let anyone with a gun convince you that cruelty is holy. I do not know what comes next. I know winter is coming harder. I know the disease waves will keep finding weak bodies. I know factions will keep trying to own the story. I know there are still decent people trying to keep a block alive without turning into a gang. I also know I can keep talking a little longer, in short bursts from a shed with a battery and a microphone. That is not heroic. That is just what I can do. And if someone out there is building a record, keep building it. If someone out there is keeping a clinic going, keep it going. If someone out there is hauling freight and refusing to be robbed in the name of God, keep refusing. If someone out there is praying, pray in a way that makes you kinder, not meaner. If you cannot pray, fine, be kind anyway. That is the one decision that keeps showing up in every version of this story, biblical or psychological or political. Someone decides to help or someone decides to hunt.